Hey, what's up, Liron here. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to paint greens in a beautiful, interesting way. We're actually going to talk about a lot of the fundamentals of composition, value, how to change the reference photo to make it more interesting and just better. And if you want to learn how to use greens in your paintings more effectively and without them looking maybe too jarring or garish or too strong or out of balance, I think this one is for you. So let's get to it. So we'll start as always with the drawing stage. Now, right off the bat, you will get to see me doing quite significant changes here. The composition is much more skewed towards the top in the original, so that the top of the house almost touches the edge of paper. Now, I didn't want that to be like that in the painting. I wanted to bring the house a little closer to the center, vertically speaking. So I lowered all of this side of the hill that goes diagonal so that there is more room up above, and that means there's less room down below, which I'm perfectly fine with. Now, because the house is at quite a bit of distance from us, I can just freehand it. Perspective becomes less significant in larger distances, so you can kind of draw things as you see them, and you're less prone to falling to optical illusions. Where it will get more important is actually with the fence, the stumps of the fence. That will be a little more important getting right. You don't want to make sure that your lines are at least, vertical when they have to be, or that the angle is kind of close, especially for the side of the house that's slightly moving away from us, right? But other than that, that's fine. Now, the tree up front, it's just extra baggage. We don't need it. I completely got rid of it, the tree in front of the house. I want to see the house. I want to see its front. I wanted to contrast with the foliage in the background, so I just removed that tree completely. The fence and the road are actually quite important. It's what's going to pull us into the scene, so you want to make sure you bring them close to us in a way that makes sense. And then I got rid of that shed or whatever house in the background to the left. It's not as important. I don't want any distractions there. I'm putting a very gentle indication for that tree on the right side, but honestly, I'm not even sure how prominent I wanted it to be at this point. I just kind of knew that maybe I'll place it there, maybe I won't. Now here comes the fence and the side of the road that has a lot of grass kind of popping out there. Very significant. The top line is actually made for the tops of the fence's stumps or pieces of wood, whatever that is, branches. Because I want to make sure they adhere to my perspective. And to do that, I need to get a diagonal line that represents their tops. I actually completely forgot to paint later on. You'll see the wires connecting those stumps, but whatever, that's still fine. So you see I'm putting them there following the basic principle of perspective. Things that are smaller that are farther appear to be smaller. That's the main guiding principle, and that's where perspective takes place here. So now a bit about the colors used: French ultramarine, manganese blue hue. These are my two blues. Then we have lemon yellow, Indian yellow, perlin red, cadmium red light, which is essentially an orange, and then finally neutral tint. I'm kind of going to write down notes as to what colors I'm using for mixing. This is basically ultramarine and a bit of lemon yellow, maybe a bit of Indian yellow, and neutral tint to darken it. Now, my plan is very simple at this stage. I'm going to paint everything but the lightest parts. What are the lightest parts? The rooftop, the walls of the house, in the road, and some highlights on the stumps of the fence. So I essentially have to paint around these and kind of do it as fast as I can. I want to finish most of the values in this wash, meaning even if I have to do another glaze on top, it won't have to be as strong as if I'd gone way lighter here, okay? I will have to glaze everything, almost the background and the grass and foliage closest to us, but that's pretty much it. Very thin glazes over them, nothing too strong. Now, talking a bit about greens, one thing you'll notice is that all of my greens I mix using my basically 4 primary colors with an addition maybe of 1 or 2, meaning I'm using my French ultramarine, my manganese blue hue for blues, and then I'm using my Indian yellow and my lemon yellow for yellows. And that's it. I'm not adding any other primary colors. I'm not adding too much. I'm not even adding that much red, to be honest. It's more neutral tint for darkening. And what this does is it makes all the greens be somewhat harmonious in the scene because they all stem from the same very basic colors. So that's one step I take to ensure a good color harmony. Okay, actually I'm going to skip almost the entire house.
The wall that's to the side is it has a dark blue to it, so I'm gonna leave that for later. The challenge here is to paint very fast and around those stumps. Now here's how temperature and composition play into this. The closer we get to us, the more I'm actually starting to utilize a bit more of the lemon yellow, just to make things a little more bright. You know, I'm not a big fan of lemon yellow, but here it was very necessary for that grass to be a little brighter, especially where it's closer to us, and will actually bring out more of it in future washes, and the end result will make a lot of sense to you, I believe. But this is a lot of lemon yellow, added a bit of Indian yellow too. Because I am yellowing things up a little bit as we move closer, because things tend to be a little warmer, and it's as part of aerial perspective. Things that are in the distance are a little bluer, things that are in the foreground are a little cooler. Now that I think of it, we may have an interruption, so bear with me if I pause this recording and there will be like a buzzing noise. Delivery is supposed to get here. Of course, it should have gotten here like 2 hours ago, but whatever. They're always late, never on time. I hate that. Sorry, you know me by now, probably. You know I hate these things. So I'm painting around these stumps, and then as we get to the road, I want to recreate that feel of like there's some maybe two-wheel vehicle going there, or a lot of people walking there, which kind of got rid of the grass. Maybe there's a bit of a rubble kind of thing there. But then there is a bit of grass you see growing in the middle of it. So it just makes it look very organic and very nice and kind of rural Europe, actually. That was the exact search I did to find this reference photo, by the way, which I will link as always in the description box. So yeah, very simple so far. The only trick is really knowing how to work fast enough to paint around the highlights, not lose the fluidness. But I did lose some of the flow here and there, and that's fine. If you lose it and you get a hard edge, don't be too hard on yourself. That's fine. You can't control everything, and it takes a lot of skill to really get it right. Just continue the wash as you were, and even if you got some hard edges, that's cool. Now I'm doing a bit of wet and wet, and lately I learned just how dark sometimes you need to be when you're doing these wets and wets. So I'm using a very thick mix here just to bring out, you see that side on the grass's edge where it's just darker because of the light coming somewhat from the left, maybe top, possibly left. That leads to a dark pattern here and there, and especially to the left of that road, where the grass is kind of facing away from the light. So that's the kind of things you want to pay attention to. Other than that, there isn't too much wet and wet here. I'm just kind of throwing it here and there just for fun, but because it will go ahead and dry a little blurrier. So I can go ahead and do that. Just to add maybe a grass effect. But for the most part, I used it only for this small patch of grass. Now, you may think to yourself, why do I have this ton of yellow on the left side of the road? That's just kind of by mistake. I used a lot of yellow there and I didn't spread it out enough, but that's fine. You'll see in the grand scheme of things it won't matter. Now I'm using a bit of the lemon yellow straight out from the pan just to add a few dots here and there, but I'll go over it with another wash and it will barely be visible later on. So now we're going over the house. So this is my, again, cadmium red yellow kind of color, cadmium red light, which is actually just orange. So you can use even a quinacridone orange, or any orange you have will work here, honestly. I like it specifically here a bit brighter. I just find it looks good for the roof, and it is quite bright. Also in the picture, it's probably one of the brightest colors in the scene, to be honest with you. The greens are more muted than you think. Now, as I start to build the house, you will start to see how the background and a lot of parts of the painting is still too light. You will start feeling this as we move along. But in any case, from the roof, I'm moving directly to that shadow under the roof. You know, I like to merge shapes whenever possible, especially if I'm at this stage and I have pretty good control, and I'm working on small shapes, I can make sure to mix them at least. Now, as I move to the right side of the wall, as well as some of the deeper shadows, I'm adding just a bit more French ultramarine and darker. So I'm essentially cooling the mix and going a little darker. You'll see on the right wall too. The tape here drives me crazy. This is new tape, so it doesn't work as well. I should probably use a different kind. Still better than what they sell in art stores, though. Funny enough, the cheaper hardware store is like the best, I find. So yeah, so starting to darken that dormer, which I love. I love dormers. If you know me, you know that I always love these on European buildings, whether they're rural or city. They always look so good. They have an interesting pattern of light and shadow. They create strong points of contrast that just look really good, in my opinion. So rendering that wall and then continuing to under that shed or whatever that is right now and always I'm trying to in these works not see the details, just see the overall abstract shapes. And by the way, you notice all of these sparkles in the first wash. I used quite a bit of the hairdryer just to get a bit of a texture on them, and you will see me do more of that later on, even splashing with my hands. I like the effect it creates in the grass. I should probably tilt the paper more so it flows down and creates something that looks like blades of grass. Joseph Bukovic is a real master of it. Keiko Tanabe is also really, really good at this. And she studied a lot under Alvaro Castaneda, so her style is kind of familiar to many people, but she uses it in a bit of a different way. I can definitely tell her works apart from his, and she has that quality of using a lot of splashes in a very effective manner in the foreground, which is a skill in and of itself. You have to know like the proper timing, wet and wet, all of those good stuff. So starting to establish the stumps, these are very muted. It's just kind of a mix of grays. Sometimes they're a little warmer, sometimes they're a little cooler. Overall, I think they're more close to purple rather than blue. And sometimes if you go too blue in these situations, it can look a little tacky like what I'm going to do just now. You see, it's a bit too blue. Just something to be aware of, because in the context of all the greens, it may look a little even blue, but it's actually quite purple, funny enough. But it takes time for me. I'm still training my eyes, seeing these colors more accurately, really figuring out what I'm looking at. It's not easy. Now you'll notice that the background behind the house just calls for a darker wash. So that's our main obvious next step. Like the obvious next step is to create a darker background there. Now I'm going to add a few windows to the front of the house before we get to that. These are going to be very interesting kind of focal points. They're going to attract our attention to that wall. That house is the most prominent feature in the scene probably. It plays the most significant role. It is the focal point. The road leads to it. It's just a fun composition overall. Again, I love these types of scenes. So I want to make sure that there's enough there for the viewer to enjoy. That tree that obstructs the house could also be like a secondary focal point there, but I just couldn't figure on the spot how I want to put it, where I want to place it, so I just removed it. And here we go with the darker background. So here I'm using the same kind of mix, French ultramarine, maybe this time a bit more Indian yellow, but I'm also using quite a bit of neutral tint, and I added just a bit of Parylene red in there. The Parylene red helps neutralize it a bit, muted, and maybe I've gone even a little too far, but that's fine. And the neutral tint darkens, obviously. Now, this may seem, again, way too dark, but watercolor, they dry lighter, and in the grand scheme of things, it will make sense. And by the way, maybe it is a little too dark. It is slightly darker than the reference photo. I just really wanted to enhance that contrast with the house. And you'll notice that while this section was wet, I did a lot of wet and wets with some neutral tint, just to get some kind of a pattern of trees in there. Not perfect, something I should probably improve my skill at, but that's fine. Working on it. Right. So continuing around the house, you want to work carefully around the rooftop, because that's where the majority of the shapes of the focal point are. Okay, you have the chimney, the dormer. It's one of the few details that we actually had to draw properly, so you want to make sure that you get them right. Now you see this doesn't flow much, so I need more paint, more water. You gotta train yourself to mix fast, mix on the spot. Don't worry, it's okay, things start to dry, that's fine. You really can't control everything. What you can control is what you're doing, and in this case, I'm mixing. So that was the interruption, sorry for that. Maybe I'll be a bit out of the loop. Let me get my focus back. So anyway, yes, painted around these shapes, very important to get them right, because that's, again, the main thing that's actually drawn here. Now you'll notice there's a tree still on the right that I haven't addressed, and this will be a good timing to start addressing it, including the shadows for the entirety of the right section. So I'm trying to kind of bring it out by adding some shadow to it. Probably not the best way of representing it, and foliage to me still is a mystery as well. But hopefully just seeing this attempt will help you maybe decide to do it a different way. I also should have gone over it later with some opaque paint and dark and get the light part of it on the left side, which I have forgotten. Maybe I'll do it after the painting is done, so my bad for that. But yeah, this is pretty much it for the background. Just again, that speed and preparing to mix while you're working, and also if you can, of course, mix as much as you can in advance, Now, one thing you'll notice that's very interesting here is that after we've darkened the background, if you look at the grass that's closer to us, something looks a little off, and if you compare it to the reference photo especially, the point is it's much darker than it seems. And this is why I'm going to go over it once again, and you will see how this will just drop everything in the right place. Now, so I'm starting a little lighter because I want to preserve that contrast of dark background, lighter foreground, but I will darken it ever so slightly as we get closer. Okay, now again, if you compare it to the reference photo, all the highlights right now are not significant enough in my painting because those mid values aren't there. Now, as soon as I start adding them in, you'll see how everything is going to fall in the right place. Things will feel more green. And more in the right place simply. I'm using a bit more of the manganese blue hue here together with my lemon yellow because I need to mix something that's a little stronger and a little more green on top of the previous layers. You're running the risk of going too muted if you're not taking care of that, if you're not going saturated enough. And clean enough, right? I'm not adding any neutral tint or anything like that here. Definitely not red. I don't want to dilute the saturation. But look at that left section now compared to the right. This is so much better. And don't worry about some shadows and shapes you put in there earlier. Just go over it. Thin glaze, you won't reawaken it too badly. I'm using Arch paper here, so it's good quality. I can do this quite a bit and I won't reawaken the previous layers. Had I used a cheaper paper, yes, it could have been a risk, but that's fine. Now notice how I'm using this opportunity to fix all the shapes of the highlights that I kind of went overboard with. Sometimes I left too much of them, so I'm using this opportunity to get rid of the unnecessary sections of them, which is really fun. Making sure to pull this down all the way to the road. And now I got the main things in. So we have a few more things to take care of. Just adding a few small details, a few wet and wets wherever necessary, and the flowers, those beautiful yellow bright flowers, which I'll show you how I paint. It's just so beautiful. But now I do want to enhance those poles a bit, get rid of some unnecessary highlights, and just, these are so close to us that you really want to make sure that you give them some proper care. I should probably do another version of this one where I put a little more work into them, getting them to be a little more in the balance. I went very interpretive on it, very kind of loose. And it's okay to be loose and spontaneous, but sometimes you need to have a plan too. So yeah, now I'm splashing a bit of water. I'm literally flicking it with my finger because I want to create that variety in texture, and by doing that, that's what happens. I'm also adding a bit of darkness under the bottoms of those poles that are closer to us, just because I feel like they kind of disappear into the grass in the reference photo, and I really didn't get that effect going, and I think the highlights on them are a little too strong, so that's a problem with my interpretation, right? It's not like I didn't see it properly. I executed okay, but on the wrong thing. Now, some of the background had some darker spots in it, especially in the bottom section. So I'm just adding a few brush marks and I'm going to spray over them. And then I'm going to tilt the paper a bit to help them move down just a bit, just for a few seconds, and it's good. Just to get this strong contrast yet again from the bottom. And lastly, I am going to put in those flowers. Now, it's funny, I'm using my John Brilliant by Shinhan PWC. The color itself is white, kind of slightly yellowish. It's not really fully yellow, but our mind doesn't care. What we're looking for, and I wrote it in the note, is the value accuracy is more important than the actual color. So as long as we recognize that's a really light value against the slightly darker grass, that's all our brains need. Now, if you look at a reference photo, the greens look, again, misleadingly light. They look very bright and light. Greens tend to be much darker than they appear. That's a common trap. That's something to be aware of. So we've talked about the composition in terms of drawing and shapes and enhancing it. We've talked about the composition of the greens, where we're using the same kind of 4 primary colors, and everything stems from that, and we're really trying to preserve that. We talked about starting from slightly cool in the background background, going a little warmer in the foreground. Notice how I did not mix 5 types of pre-mixed greens. That could have been a disaster if I'd started using May green and phthalo green and all of those. They're completely weird and bizarre, and they would feel really not like they don't belong in the painting, and they won't work with the rest of the colors, which is even more important. As long as you work with fewer colors, you preserve that kind of a thing, you will get a harmonious combination of greens. Okay, so it's something I know a lot of people have trouble with. I wanted to address it in a video. Hopefully that helps. The best advice I can give you is keep it simple. Use even just 2 primary colors and vary them using the third, like the red. But yeah, just my humble advice. I hope you find it helpful. Removing the tape, I'm going to show you in just a second the final result scanned, which I think looks awesome and is a better showcase of the colors. Let's zoom in a bit so you see all of the details, and now we can wrap it up face to face.
So thank you so much once again for watching. As you've seen, I've changed quite a bit here when it comes to the placement of the elements, just to make it a little more interesting, a little better, in my opinion at least. Some very mild changes to the values, but mostly the arrangement of elements, and of course the colors I kind of broke free. Though I did try to mix what I saw in some places more accurately. The flowers, I think, in the end were a nice touch, and all you really need is some opaque paint. You don't even need to recreate that same exact yellow and all of that. But hopefully that gives you a picture of how to use green in an effective way. A lot of people have trouble with this. A lot of people kind of lose sense of how to get things to balance well, and it really is all about the fundamentals at the end of the day. And if you can get a nice color balance, if you can kind of match the colors you see, you will get beautiful and interesting results. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment if you enjoyed this one, and also check out my frustration-free watercolor course. Link is in the description box below if you want to learn how to paint like this, let go, enjoy the process, and get through that initial phase that gets a lot of people stuck in watercolor. So thank you so much. We'll talk to you again real soon.